Welcome back to Whence, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
This is episode 267. Thanks for joining us again this week. Before we get started, I would love to remind you that this episode of Whence is brought to you by Masonic Revival. Masonic Revival is contemporary designs for modern-day Freemasons. These are wonderful, wonderful designs put together by Brother Edgar Alejandro, a past master. He has fresh designs. This isn't your typical throw a square and compass on something and call it a day. These are brand new things you're not going to find anywhere else. And the line has actually grown to include aprons and neckties, pocket squares, tie bars, tons of other accessories, including pins and all kinds of things of that nature. I myself have tons of items from Masonic Revival. Their Azul Paisley collection is just amazing. I love the way that tie looks. It's got like a double fabric in the tie, and it's thinner around where you actually tie it, so you can tie a really nice knot and still get a sweet drape out of the tie. It's pretty fantastic. And he just launched the Regal, which is a really nice classic timepiece. It just says Masonic Revival. It's got the square and compass and the logo on the inside. It's a really nice hardware and a classic leather band. You're not going to beat it. It looks really nice, and I think it's only about $100. So check it out. Nice timepiece, and as always, sign up for their newsletter, and I think they give you 10% off on your first order. So check them out. This week, we have a wonderful interview with Frater O, and we talk about Esoterics 101. And this is something I had mentioned in a previous episode that we would do it, and I told you all to check out the episode of the Masonic Roundtable in which we talked about Esoterics 101. The main difference in these two episodes is going to be where we give a quick rundown of some additional schools of wisdom, per se, and then we dive a little bit deeper in, and we will eventually follow this up with like an Esoterics 201 class or something like that, where we're going to dive a little bit deeper. So, without any further delays, let's get right into this week's conversation with Frater O. All right, guys, we're back this week with Frater O, and we're talking about Esoterics 101. Now, of course, in episode number 15 of the Masonic Roundtable, we did an Esoterics 101 episode where we gave an introduction to esoteric research and discuss some of the merits. It is definitely deeper than just that one episode. That episode was about 47 minutes, and we'll probably be around the same time in this episode, but I think we're going to cover some different areas. We're going to talk about perhaps where these esoteric teachings or where these schools lead us. And so, again, we're really lucky to have Frater O on the program this week. So welcome back, brother.
It's always a pleasure to be back.
Yeah, it's not the same when you're not here. Esoteric, what does it mean? Most of the time, this is a scary term for a lot of Masons who might not see Freemasonry in this way. In fact, New Zealand some years ago banned the term esoteric, but let's understand what it means. So esoteric in itself is defined as intended for or only likely understood by a few. In other words, a chosen select. So if we think about that, Freemasonry in itself is a chosen select. I mean, I could have a Zoolander moment here and say, ipso facto, Freemasonry is an esoteric society. There really is no reason to say it is not an esoteric society. Simply, we have hidden teachings. We have so much hidden in our rituals and in our words, and it is indeed understood by only a chosen select. That select is, I think, maybe not so much defined as somebody choosing you, but the individual's ability to determine what these things actually mean. And within that, that's kind of what we joke about sometimes, the Blue Lodge being the waiting room, as it were. How has your experience, Frater, been with finding other Masons who maybe you would classify as a chosen select within our fraternity?
I'm trying to think of how to answer that. That's a really, really good question.
Have you witnessed or have you been around brothers, I guess, who have gauged your interest in the esoteric only because they almost want to out themselves to you as, listen, I think about esoterics in the lodge and I'm almost scared to mention it because so many guys are gonna look at me funny? Or I mean, have you met dudes like that?
Of course. I mean, I was definitely one of those people. When you first come into esoterics in the lodge, personally speaking, I went through the degree and I was walking up to like the past masters and all these, senior officials in purple that happened to be there. And I'm like, man, like, I think it was this. Like, I think this was represented this. And they just
Right.
looked at me like I had 6 heads.
Right.
They're like, well, maybe you might want to go talk to that brother over there. And then I would go talk to that brother, and the brother again would look at me like I had 6 heads.
Yeah.
And then he'd be like, well, maybe you might want to go talk to that person. And I found myself going around the room. And then little over time, I kept on finding certain people that I would gravitate towards for wisdom or knowledge, or they would give me a little piece of the puzzle, so to speak. And then I just found myself, well, I guess this is a journey best left for myself to find it all, because honestly, all the answers that I'm going to find is on my journey. No one's going to hand them to me.
Right. Yeah, it seems like we just really have to do this work. And we talk about Freemasonry being this thing that we have this internal work to do. And it's almost like you have no other choice, if you want to dive deep, than to do the internal work. But we're not the only society who does. Freemasonry is a school of wisdom. And for a lot of people, that might be something they consider weird, or does that sound odd? And I don't mean school as in your typical schools. Like, you guys should really who are listening to this and curious about it, should think about ancient Greece, or just some examples would be like the Kabbalah, or Kabbalah, however you would like to pronounce it, the Pythagoreans, certain religious groups like Zoroastrianism or the Gnostics or the Essenes, the Egyptian mystery schools, later Greek mystery schools, Rosicrucianism, which is heavy in Freemasonry due to its Christian element and the early Freemason kind of link that Christianity had with it in the beginning. Alchemy, Freemasonry, of course, is a part of this. The Bavarian Illuminati, even the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, Martinism, which again is another one that's heavy within Masonry, Boda, which is builders of the Adytum, and of course the more commercialized version of this would be like AMORC, which is the Rosicrucian Society that's out there in California. And I think we should maybe just start with what a lot of people might be very curious about, because they are thinking about how in-depth it must be, and that's the Kabbalah. So if you study the Kabbalah, or if you've even seen it, I'm sure most people have seen the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. It's like 10 circles essentially connected by a bunch of lines, and it represents God at the top, the earthly realm at the bottom, the attributes of God and the way they connect. And through these connections, they represent a lot of different, I guess, esoteric values. But what I found interesting was something Frater O had turned me on to initially a long time ago, which was the Tree of Life's real connection with the chakras. You want to jump in on that?
So chakras are more based off of Buddhism and Hinduism. Granted, it's a religion, but their ultimate ideology behind these chakras, which is the Sanskrit term for wheel, is pertaining to an energy center of the body. And each one of these energy centers pertain to a gland. And mostly these glands are endocrine glands, and they sit around the spinal column. And through the ideology, or through this modality of activating certain glandular systems, you can channel energy up from the what they would call the root chakra through the chakra system up the spinal column, and activating the actual brow chakra, which is actually the last one of the pineal gland of the organs, that allows you to achieve these Christ-like or Buddhistic states, or ultimately have outer body experiences, or again have a different experience, or raise your consciousness. And the Kabbalah is very similar. It's just more of a different take on that. There's this old Hindu allegory. It's called the 5 Blind Men and the Elephant. And for those who haven't heard it, it goes like this. There was a wise sage in the village, and there was 5 blind men in this camp. And each blind man wanted to know what it was like to touch an elephant. So the sage brought all 5 blind men around, and they each grabbed a different part of the elephant. The first blind man grabbed the trunk, and he was like, well, it's a long, kind of hairy tube. And the third blind man was like, well, I don't know what you're touching, but what I'm touching is a big leathery long sheet, and he was grabbing the ear, and the third gentleman was like, well, two of you are crazy because I'm touching a huge wall, and it's really thick and it's really heavy. You can't be touching the elephant. And the fourth said the same thing, was like, well, I'm grabbing a tree trunk. I don't know what you guys are touching. The fifth, last of all, was like, well, I'm grabbing a long rope. And he was grabbing, of course, the tail. Each one was grabbing a part of the elephant, but they all had their own individual experiences. And how important it is when you look at religion, it's religion or any philosophical school of thought or any esoteric school of thought, it's all about the path of truth. And there's a quote before I kind of get into the Kabbalah I would love to read by past master Dr. John Gilbert from his book Masonry is Meditation. And the quote goes, "The safest route to divine truth is to believe nothing that you read, nothing that you hear, believe nothing that you feel, believe only what you know in your mind, heart, and soul to be true, beyond all shadow of a doubt." And so don't take our word for it. Truth, like we talked about, is a journey best taken alone. And this is things that we've uncovered and kind of what it was helped us along the path. And maybe some things you'll gravitate towards and maybe some things you won't. But ultimately, back to the Kabbalah. Kabbalah is a study of an atom, the Adam Haman, the original man. Or, if you get into the study of an atom or AUM, is very similar. So if you start looking at the study of an atom and you start looking at the study of atom, Kaman or Haman, there's really shocking correlations between the two. An atom being a human body, being a man. So they kind of gets really deep into, again, that there's two sides of the body. There's polarity, and there's also this middle pillar. So they have this three-pillar system that's very, very similar to what a lot of people might understand what we're talking about. So the Kabbalah is more of a Jewish mysticism ideology pertaining to the human body. Kind of touched a little bit on the Kabbalah and chakras. Is there anything that you would like to add to any of that, Robert?
The Kabbalah has this ideology that is, of course, to say that it's ridiculously old and when it was written is an understatement. It in fact also ties into the ideas of things like the Zohar. And that's something that we can talk about at a later date. Somebody who has actually talked on Kabbalah extensively, if our listeners out there who want to know more about that in specifics, I would definitely recommend, if you're up in the Massachusetts area, and if you ever get a chance to talk with Brother Greg Kaminsky from the Occult of Personality podcast, dude is a genius. So if you can get a chance to talk to him, in fact, I think we're going to have him on the show again soon. And another person to really talk about is Brother Eric Diamond from the Ex Oriente podcast. He has talked about the Kabbalah on several occasions, and he's somewhat what I would consider a very great knowledge base. One of the other things that we did mention was Pythagoreans. Pythagoreans, a really interesting society. We had talked a little bit about them on previous podcasts. Perhaps most people might recognize the name from a cartoon that we had talked about on several occasions. We talked about Donald Duck in Mathmagic Land, and of course Donald Duck in this episode joins the Pythagoreans, and he holds up his hand and he's got the pentagram on his hand, of course, as a sign of recognition that he's a member. Again, a really neat society that very clean living. The sun played a huge part in their rituals and their beliefs, and they studied the mathematics of all things, like the sacred geometry, as it were. This is another idea where a lot of scholars think music theory really started to come out, talking about note structure. And then we talk about the golden ratio. Very fascinating cartoon. And again, I have to tip hat to Frater O. He's the first person who showed me this cartoon 4 years ago, I think it was.
Yeah, maybe 5. Vibration and sound is a few episodes that we've done on as well. And so when we talk esoterics, we talked about more the hidden aspects of reality. And another term for that as well, until recently has become pretty popular. Before it was kind of a fringe topic, but the occult term. And all that term means is the Latin translation for hidden. That's it. Just how gravity exists, that's occult. We know that it exists because things fall to the ground. Let's face it, it's a fact of reality. So technically that's occult. That's the hidden world. So when we start studying the deeper aspects of knowing thyself and the deeper aspects of the human body, that does fall under the esoteric or the occult area. The Pythagoreans, one in particular, I highly recommend going back and listening to some other shows. You in particular, Robert, did a great episode covering who they were, why they existed. So throughout society, there's always been esoteric orders that have existed, that have always places where people that wanted to go study and find deeper aspects about yourself.
Right, which kind of leads us into the idea of the mystery schools. Well, before mystery schools, I guess we should probably touch on something like Gnosticism. The idea, many people have seen these keep calm memes on Facebook or on social media, wherever you are. One that we kind of laughed at, we got a kick out of, was the one that said, keep calm and know thyself. It's kind of the mantra, as it were, for Gnosticism and a lot of the schools that teach a lot of the hidden knowledge. And it just alludes to know thyself, because to know thyself is to know the Creator, which is pretty interesting of an idea. Another great thing we can talk about here is the Egyptian mystery schools. A great book, The Lost Keys of Freemasonry by Manly P. Hall, takes you through the experience, granted a fictional experience, of an Egyptian mystical rite. If you have the book, great. If you don't, go buy it. It's only like $8 paperback. If you're lucky enough to have a really cool copy, like a hardcover, good on you, because they're hard to find. But The Lost Keys of Freemasonry is a pretty good Egyptian or fictional Egyptian mystical rite, beginning to end. You follow a neophyte all the way to his graduation, as it were, in maybe an Egyptian priesthood type thing.
Yeah, there's a brother in Colorado who talks about the Initiatic Experience, Robert Hurd. He does a great job of getting into the Egyptian mysteries, if that's something that you're into.
Yeah, definitely. Brother Rob Hurd is phenomenal. His book, it's a shorter book, but he did so much, I think, for Freemasonry, just releasing that book. The idea that he puts out there is really powerful, in that so many people connected with it, and they've started to make Freemasonry better because they read that book. They understood the importance of that initiatic experience. So it's kind of funny, because that was something that really wasn't talked about. In fact, the term initiatic experience isn't something that you find everywhere. It's almost like he coined the term. I mean, I know he didn't, but it's almost like he did. It
is. It's funny. So, what is all the point of this? What is the point of esoterics? What is the point of all these mystery schools? And I'm going to sum it up in a quote by a famous producer and director and writer, David Lynch, who's not a Mason, but he said it like this: it's all about consciousness. And if you have a golf ball size consciousness, you'll have a golf ball size understanding. The more consciousness you have, the more understanding you'll have when you look at something. And to also quote Samuel Johnson, who's a brother, I can write in a dictionary, but I cannot supply you with the intelligence to understand it.
Correct. And so I think as we move through these different ideas of these mysteries, these schools of wisdom, as it were, you're going to find that, I hope by the end of the episode, you're going to put it all together, because this is about a journey to discovering something. And that something, just to be told, has no value to you. Trust me. So hopefully you will gather it and maybe put it together, and then hold on to it and use what you learn to better understand and grow the consciousness. Another interesting school of wisdom, of course, is the Rosicrucianism. And again, this is heavy in Freemasonry, in that there are some invitational-only bodies, SRICF. The famous Rosicrucian orders stem from a gentleman, Christian Rosenkreutz, who's maybe wrote 2 or 3 books that the orders study, and they teach a wide variety of really interesting concepts. I can't speak too much about Rosicrucianism other than to say I think what they study is really interesting. I am not a member of any Rosicrucian society, but it is heavy in Christian ideals, and so is Martinism, as a matter of fact.
With Rosicrucianism, it's pretty fascinating, but it's more like, Egyptian-based mysteries and allegories pertaining back to getting to these deeper states of yourself. Fascinating. Again, there seems to be a lot of traces inside of Masonry that has Rosicrucian history inside of Blue Lodge, but like you mentioned, there are independent orders after you become a Mason that do exist. However, if you usually ask to join them, you are kind of banned for life, or you can you ultimately do the internal work, and usually a lot of those doors open up naturally.
Of course, some of the other things we talked about, schools of wisdom, were the Bavarian Illuminati, who weren't necessarily bad guys. A lot of people give them this thing where they're bad, but really they had some really great ideas about how society should work. Unfortunately, governments of the day and the people didn't quite enjoy that, so they got nixed, right? So then there's the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which was founded by a few great Masons, has a similar degree structure. They have grades instead of degrees. There's some heavy implications within the Order of Golden Dawn in that they do use ceremonial magic. We touched on Martinism already. Builders of the Adytum, Boda, which is a great online resource, correspondence courses and study, great for telling you all of the things that might be going on in these other schools, but in modern language, so that's cool. And of course, AMORC, a more commercialized version of esoteric schools of thought. Going back to Freemasonry, we have to make sure that within Freemasonry, we're looking for these hidden truths that, again, not everything is in plain writing or in plain sight. Well, it is kind of in plain sight, but it takes a special eye to see those things. Just some examples without going into them. We've got some things going on in our senior and junior deacons, what they kind of stand for. During the entered apprentice obligation, there's some things that happen that are super, super esoteric. There's even an allusion to Egyptian ritual within Freemasonry. Egyptian ritual that leads to Thoth, pillars that are underground, and even allusions to the Tetragrammaton. But how deep is the stuff hidden? It can be pretty deep. It's like an onion. You got to keep pulling back these layers. But let's dive into some of the meat of that onion. Frater, what do you think?
Masonry, for people that aren't Masons or new Masons, everything's veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. And everything you need is directly in plain sight. Again, we talked earlier on this path of this is the journey that's only you can take. And it's a pretty difficult journey because you have to find out a lot of things about yourself. And Masonry is not a religion. It's more of a philosophical college that it presents things in symbols that's very, very, very important. So there's no one telling you, no, this is it. This is the definitive answer because so-and-so said so. No, it's all in symbols for you to figure out yourself exactly what it means, which is probably one of the best ways and only ways to present truth. So with that being said, typical conversations with us, I really just want to go dive really deep into the meat and potatoes of it all. And in Masonry, we have this thing called initiation, which is important. And what is initiation? Like, why do you have to be initiated into a fraternity? So the word initiate actually comes from a Greek origin. It signifies a person who is made into a new beginning, who has been reborn, a new plant, or one who's pretty much been remade. The root word for Latin is used to designate, quote, the first principles of science. Since the era of the Romans, at least the word initiation has been employed to mean admission into mysteries. So we've kind of like alluded to mysteries in a mystery school and mystery schools that have existed through the ages. And what this mystery school is. And we've alluded in past lessons of King Solomon's temple pertaining to the human body. However, Masonry is the allegory of King Solomon's temple and how that temple operates, people in charge of that temple, and the craftsmen and the workers, and then how the workers use working tools to better their own personal craft. And there's definitely a big distinction between operative masonry, which was actually stonemasons that actually physically built temples. It's been alluded to that the Gothic cathedrals were built by Templars, which have origins back to masonry, and then also the Egyptian temples and so forth and so on. But there's been definitely over time during the early 1700s, there was this unique connection between the spiritual aspect and the tangible aspect on how these working tools and these things that were made, these massive structures without any technology that had perfectly solar and lunar alignments and lines up perfectly with certain star systems and solstices and alignments, they can also go back to the human body. Pretty fascinating when you really think about it. So they took this ideology and they transferred it from operative masonry to speculative, the intangible aspect about your human body. And how do you make these things that are inside of yourself a lot better? Again, hidden, more occult, and esoteric.
We talk about this all the time, and it really comes down to this kind of really interesting correlation that we consistently have, which is this idea of the human body. I wonder why that is, Frater.
I think Matthew 7:7 says it best, knock, seek, and ask, and then the door will be opened unto you. So technically you listening to the show, you have to ask the universe and go searching for it. Otherwise, this isn't going to come to you on a silver platter. I hate to break it to you.
Right. I think maybe I want to start like a Facebook group one day. Maybe, I don't know when I'm going to do it because I sure don't have the time. Maybe I'll find the time. I don't know. Maybe we should start a Facebook group and just dump esoteric memes in there like all day. and we'll see, maybe we can become enlightened through the meme universe. But it is really interesting that we have this symbolism of these building tools that literally, we talk about, okay, so you're building a building, and then we talk about building ourselves. So automatically you make this correlation. I mean, I've said it before, but the 1972 book for the Intenders, as a learning book for Masonic fraternity here in Illinois, plainly says that Solomon's temple is our allegory, right? This is our path to whatever it is we're seeking of the body of man. And the idea is that we attach that to working tools and we attach that to an actual building, just help our minds focus on this. The way the human psyche works, it makes it easier for us to focus on something tangible and then relate it to the intangible, which is a tool that man has employed to help initiate and help teach certain moral, ethical, and spiritual lessons throughout the ages. One of the really interesting things that I find fascinating, and we've talked about it, touched on it several times, is this idea of the Ark of the Covenant and the mind. In itself, this idea of perhaps the ark is a consciousness, but the ark is also said to have been the seat of God on earth, the throne. And then we have to ask, where does the ark lie in the temple? These Phoenician temples that the Solomon's temple actually is, it's really interesting ideas, and your mind can just go wild thinking about all the different correlations.
So, in life, you get to a point, at least I did, and I'm sure I know for a fact you were definitely in a very similar place when we had these discussions, is that you get to a point where you go, there has to be more to this, right? This experience that I'm having, this matrix that, this holographic canvas that we're experiencing life through. And I think you said a really good quote in one of our first episodes, is that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. So there has to be more to this. Why does this place exist? Once you get past the material constructs of reality. So maybe it could be wealth or finance or family, and you get to a point you're like, well, why does this all exist? And that's really the idea of truth, of finding out what that is, and ultimately who you are. I mean, because there's a lot more to you than this just was Joe Rogan usually calls it in his podcast, this meat suit that you have to operate this experience.
Right. Yeah, you're at the helm of something that you don't even know what it is. I always joke around, like with my kids, I say that you're essentially Power Ranger in one of the robots. You are one thing that is seated in a captain's chair that is just flawlessly embedded into this flesh machine. And we are, in fact, this is limited. We are being limited physically and mentally by being in this form. And the form itself, this human body, you can quote from the Gospel of Judas, one of the Gnostic texts, and in it, now I'm not saying this is real, I'm not saying, not trying to belittle anybody's viewpoints on Jesus and Judas. In the Gospel of Judas is standing in front of Jesus. So he says something to the effect of, Judas, you are the one who will sacrifice the man who clothes me. So in this, he's talking about a freedom, an ascension, a return to the pleroma. And this is, a Gnostic idea, of course. And we talked with Dr. Bruce Fisher, who had some amazing concepts. I mean, everything the guy says is amazing, but he talked about how we're limited through human eyes, how we're limited through the scope of our ears and what we can hear and what we can feel. Imagine if you just were and you didn't have these things. You just were. You would experience all things at one time. And the hope of a lot of the esoteric knowledge and these things within the secret schools of wisdom that we talk about is that you get to a point where we're talking about apotheosis about man becoming the physical master, a physical representation of the atom on Earth in the flesh. And when you get to that point, this is the realization, this is the goal, whether you want to believe it or not. And it seems to be just as the Dalai Lama had alluded to, that it's a wagon wheel of sorts with all the spokes leading to the center. Your allegory of the 5 men touching the different parts of an elephant, realizing that they're all necessarily touching the thing, but it's their own experiences, their own perceptions, but yet it speaks to their ignorance as well, because they're going to argue about what it is they're touching, but they're all touching the same thing.
Esoterics too, I like to sum it up in my discussions with brethren who kind of take me aside and they go, "Whoa, I've been reading this book, I've been reading that and this, and I'm studying this, and that's great, and that's all important. But imagine this allegory, right? You have a blind friend. He's never looked. He's never seen. He doesn't even know what the color red is. How do you explain in words what the color is in red is? You can explain to him how the retina works. You can explain to him how the eye works and how light can go through the pupil and how it flips it upside down and the brain reinterprets it. So you can break down everything about the eye. Until that blind person looks through the eye, then he will truly understand on how the eye works. The same can kind of be said about the things that we're alluding to. Until you start to open up these deeper aspects of yourself, then truly you can look through a different lens or a different perspective, or maybe different dimensions, or so to speak, higher states of consciousness. So it's really important to take what you read and what you listen to and with a grain of salt, because ultimately what we're proposing here is our own dogma. What other people have written about, like Robert mentioned, is another part of the elephant. So the path to truth is for you and for you alone to take.
True story, well said, and I couldn't express it any better. And of course, maybe you're going to find your own path, and maybe you find your own dogma or your own system that really seems to speak to you. And that's just so important, because then you're actually utilizing your mind and your consciousness for doing the actual inner work. And this is what it's all about. So I hope you guys really enjoyed the discussion this week. It's hard to, as we found out in the TMR Esoterics episode, it's really hard to dive into this topic and figure out just what to talk about, especially as a 101. But I hope you found the episode edifying in the fact that maybe it was a good companion, or maybe a little bit different kind of a discussion on esoterics. And make no mistake, this is not the last episode on esoterics in a series. We're probably going to continue this maybe in a 2 or 3 part series where we do esoterics and we raise the bar each episode. And we're going to try to bring about some heavier ideas, but also break them down into a way that you understand what we're talking about. Because Frater and I have read these books, and then we've read them again, and then we've read them again, because the language is really difficult and the subject matter can be challenging, to say the least. I mean, Bruce S. Fisher's books are challenging. A good friend of the show, Steven, who has funded our show and done some great donations, Steve, thanks. He actually sent me pictures of all his Bruce S. Fisher books when we talked to Bruce Fisher. He's like, check it out. And he's like, I have that book, I have this book, and he just spoke really highly of him. And Brother Steven is one of the more esoteric cats out there who we can always bounce stuff off of. So, Brother Steven, thanks for your support. I know you're always listening. Frater, any closing thoughts or comments for the episode?
Yeah, it's been a great episode. It's been really difficult. I know you probably hear an edited version of this, but a lot of us are sitting back and going, I don't know. This, we're trying to spread this out. So if there's anything we haven't touched on in this episode and you would like us to kind of dive deeper into in the next episodes that are going to be coming up in the future in esoterics, let us know.
Absolutely. So you can email Frater O at fraterolux@gmail.com. And of course, you can hit me up at admin@wcypodcast.com. Make sure you follow Frater O and like the page on Facebook to see some of his updates. With that, we're going to talk to you guys next week. And that's it. Thanks again for coming on the show, Frater.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. As always, You can email Frater O at fraterolux@gmail.com. You can email me anytime at admin@wcypodcast.com or wcypodcast@gmail.com. They both go to the same address. So ask any questions you'd like. If you'd love to support this show, and I know you do, please consider going to any one of our numerous sponsors that we have, and all of these sponsors, with the exception of one, are all Masonic in nature. So of course we have bankersbest.com. So if you go to buybankersbest.com and you use the promo code BBWCY357, you're going to get 20% off of all of that stuff, which is really great. If you go over to WCYpodcast.com, our website, and click on support the show, the first thing at the top there is King Solomon's Reserve. That link is the only place you can get King Solomon's Reserve beard oil. It's a wonderful product. It's actually made historically factual, as close as we can to a recipe of beard oil of the time and the age of King Solomon. Its fragrance is that of black fig and honey. It's a really great smell. It's a great beard oil. I've got nothing but compliments on this formula that Brother Levi worked so hard to put together. So please check that out. We have On It Labs. Of course, this was the item I was speaking of that isn't necessarily Masonic, but nonetheless a great product. Alpha Brain and Hemp Force Protein. So if you click through our links here on WCYpodcast.com, click on support the show, and then click any of the banners for the On It stuff that we've got right in the center of the page, you actually just use code WCY and you get 10% off your order. So Alpha Brain has increased focus. It's all natural. There's no dyes in the capsules. It's vegan approved. It helps out with lucid dreaming, heightened awareness, and of course the number one thing about this thing is that there's no caffeine, which is super important to me. Another way you can support is a direct donation via PayPal. So all over our site you can just click that donate via PayPal button, and whether you donate 50 cents or $5 or whatever you want to donate, it all goes back into this show's production costs, hosting fees, and things of that nature. It goes without saying that the show does cost a considerable amount, considering that we always keep every episode available to you at all times. We don't keep a backlog for members or anything like that. It's just always all available, always for you, all the time. Through your donations is what makes that possible. So when you donate, when you help us out, you are a producer of this show. You can also head on over to freemasonryart.com, check out any number of the great things Juan Sepulveda has over there. Everything's made in the USA, made by a brother, unique products unavailable anywhere else. His professional fine art is also pretty choice. And of course, we can't forget our show sponsor, MasonicRevival.com, with Brother Edgar Alejandro. Brand new products all the time. Please check it out. If none of that strikes your fancy, please consider checking out our pins. So if you would like to support the show and become a real producer of the program, buy a pin. We have a lapel pin. We've got some money clips, tie bars, and some cufflinks, which are on the way as well. So we will have those, which I will put the links up to be able to purchase those as soon as they are in. And that's how you can support the show. Some people have asked, what do you do with some of the funds that we donate? Well, we were able to do some things like I said. We've been able to keep the program available with all the episodes going back. We have a free application out there that allows you to download cool Masonic wallpapers, and all of the papers mostly that we read on the program are available through the app, so you can download those and have them available to you when you are, say, in a lodge night and maybe you need some education. Well, it's in the palm of your hand, so it's pretty cool. But one other thing we are able to do at times is give things away. Like around Christmas time, around the holiday time, we try to put a whole Masonic book up on the PDF inside the app, which is fun. But we've been able to do some great projects too, like we've remastered several of Manly P. Hall's lectures. So typically you download these on YouTube or whatever, and there's a lot of hissing and popping in the background because this was just a little recorder in the room that was capturing Manly P. Hall talking and the ambient noise. So we've cut out about 90% of the ambient noise and the hissing, and what you have is probably some of the cleanest remastered Manly P. Hall lectures you'll ever hear. And those are totally free. We remastered them. I personally went through them and changed the levels and tried to crisp them up as much as possible. And so you can go to our website, wcypodcast.com, click on Remastered Manly P. Hall Lectures, click on the photograph of Manly P. Hall, and you can read what people have to say about it. They just commented underneath it, thanks for the efforts on the project, spectacular work, excellent work, thank you so much. The comments for what we've done here are nothing but great, and we have a collection of 23 Manly P. Hall lectures. So if you click on this picture, it takes you to a link to a Google Drive where you can just download them. So it's pretty cool if you're into it. So thanks again to everybody who puts this together. I know this is a little bit longer of a segment about how to support the show, but I really want you guys to know how much I am thankful for your support and where that money goes. So with that, we will bid you adieu this week. We'll be back next week with another great episode. I hope you all have a fantastic week ahead of you. This week is going to be pretty intense Masonically. I've got lots of stuff going on. So if I'm a little bit delayed in getting on to your emails and getting back to you, I do apologize. I am a little bit inundated, but I try to answer 2 or 3 of them a day to make a dent. So with that, I will talk to you all next week. Stay on the level. For Whence Came You, I'm Robert Johnson.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.